So I mean, like our usual question that we begin with is, what does it mean? What does studio-based practice mean to you at this point in time, this geographic location you're in London, and uh, and just in terms of your general practice? I mean, just give us maybe an idea of how those things fit together in relation to the studio for you.
Okay. Um,
And take your time.
okay. I need to. Yeah, studio's everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, more and more as I get older, I realise how vital just having this lifeline, this space is for me. I've worked at home for pretty much over 20 years now, living in a big city. The journey time's hour there, hour back. You've got work, it's all that, so it just means I can chisel away at things at my own rate. That's one thing about being an artist now for over 30 or so years, but just how much you can chisel away, just keeping going really is just what's the most important thing.
So, I mean, you would say the studio does affect the way you paint in some ways, or is it a situation where you have an idea that you're always chiseling away at on paper or in some other medium?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm just always working away. I think it's vital just to keep working. Um, yeah, there is ways of saying this. I have in my mind. I need to think. I think because I work with people who are full time now and that aren't in work. They can't make work anymore. So I keep a position where I'm freelance, and that gives me the headspace to keep working. And what it is I'm trying to say is you find your own way of working over years that is enough to keep you ticking over. Like I don't want to push too fast or push too slow. I find my own pace over the years. And at the moment I'm in this kind of phase where I'm making paint marks and keeping them indexed actually. It's like an index of paint marks of various tones of hues and colours and scale and gesture. And this will all be put aside soon, pretty much when I run out of gel. And then I start painting on the wall. So this will all become a space of from transition to kind of making. So I'm making a painting from separate paint marks composed on that surface there. And it's very much about just keeping going, really, Bill, just ticking over, finding my own pace. I always kind of think at the analogy of a hare and a tortoise. You just keep going.
Certainly. I mean, so one of the things otherwise that I guess, because you've had so many spaces that you've worked in through the years, I mean, there's kind of two questions in that. One is kind of like a little bit more about the residency notion of stuff. Like you've done several residencies, particularly the Hauser and Wirth one, and like now you're working in this kind of space. I mean, is there something qualitatively different about being in the residency spaces and mindset, in terms of the way that having this studio at your disposal that's more institutionally realized, does that change the way you work? Does that offer you more opportunities? Is it crippling in some ways? What is it? What's
Yeah, yes and no. Because on the residency at Howes and Worth, or I had one in Montreal a few years ago, yeah, you can start to realise other projects. So the Hauser one was trying to make larger some of the small little three-dimensional sketches that I've been making for the last few years. So that's what I realised on that was trying to push the paint into a kind of cardboard housings, like self-made spaces, rather than using a space in the gallery. I'd made my own painting spaces to hang these kind of paint skins down. So it was amazing for that, because I could realise a whole body of work that I had no chance. But then when you leave the residency, then I'm confronted with what do I do with that. So I had the ambitions there, but for an artist, yeah, there's not many sales. It's kind of what happens afterwards. So I was actually quite grateful to get back off that again and back to other challenges once I found storage for the other works.
So I mean, yeah. So having worked, sort of tie into that, these have been the residencies you're talking about, but you've lived in different cities around the world, and like the built environment sort of affects the way an artist paints, I think, or something like that. And so studios are constructed in a certain way; they permit certain things, they limit other things. Is there a favorite or like a particular studio that you think about in terms of your own work that was really productive, or that is maybe like really someplace that was distinctive in your practice personally?
No, I think they've all had. There's always a quality. I mean, in this particular space, I could have chose any room in this flat, but it was the way I encountered this wall as I walked in the room, and that was wonderfully fresh. And it's big enough. It's 3.5 by 2.5. So like the residency, I had a space the size of this flat, and that was amazing, you know. But the ambition doesn't change really. You just keep chiseling away at your own ambitions, and how can you make a painting at this historical moment that somehow has feeling, has resonance, can challenge something new. I just want to see something new. And I mean, the history of my practice with the particular paint skins is dating back over 20 years now, and every time I'm grateful for having found this way of making work, is that I'm imbuing painting in my mind with something new, that the paint is the ground and the figure simultaneously. I'm quite aware of that. I'm quite aware of how you build up and make it something that's not that. So my practice is kind of about how to work the opposite way to that really, and not something on something, but make something evolve simultaneously, that is not something that can just do on a canvas. And obviously defining an edge as I work out. And yeah, the space is very important, but I've had a studio in a bedroom where I had a double bed and my books. At least in this room, it's still books. I don't have to sleep in here.
Yeah.
And in that room, I developed my large-scale Venus painting. So it's just about having a creative space. A headspace is very important. Just space where I can lock out the world. Although I'm not, I like very much like the world. I like to look at a lot of art, and yeah.
And so then, I guess one of the other questions I've been interested in is, obviously you're painting. You're always going to be a painter. Painting is at the center of what you do. Painting may or may not require a studio, but it certainly makes a difference in it. You're working now in an environment, a painterly and artistic, a cultural environment that's heavily influenced by digital aesthetics, by digital forms of production. How does that affect your work, your conception of how your work fits within the discourse, and like how also, I guess, you maybe feel like that's defining the world we kind of live in. Like, how much pressure does that dynamic?
I mean, I don't feel a pressure about that. I mean, obviously, you can't fault the time that you were born in. If I was 5 years old, I could have seen all the early punk bands. It's that kind of aesthetic or endeavours that kind of keeps challenging. If I'd been 10 years old, I could have seen the original Doctor Who.
That for me.
Yeah, exactly, but I was just about to say that.
Yeah,
but,
why people ask for the
I'm very aware that it's very much a digital age, and very aware that we've had 15 deaths of painting, and I don't want to be part of that kind of discourse. Obviously I am. I just love painting. When I went back to art college around late 20s, suddenly I was just seized by the materiality of the medium. I wanted to do something with it, and then slowly over the years I kind of I re-taught myself after the degree, because I felt I was forced in a certain direction that I didn't really agree with. You couldn't work figuratively at that time. You probably can't now, but I wanted to ask myself why. So I have bodies of work that encourage that reading. I work with digital, something about in this big world that everything is possible. It's about how do you limit that. A number of years ago, I would only pull my images, if I do use imagery, from a shopping bag, which is silly now. It's like very Trewellian. But then I realised I could pull any fucking image, and then it became about, that's a problem. How do I stop that? Because I don't want to be able to pull every image, so then I have to have an extreme limiter on that. And then now I try not to work with image at all. I might in a various body work, but I think there's things I'm trying to do within the painting. I'm still trying to make something new that my mind hasn't. Shouldn't always be about that, but art is an innovative. It has to be innovative. I love Mondrian. He's trying to destroy art that he can see. He's trying to renounce perspective. Now his work inhabits them in fucking hair gel holders and things. It's madness. But I still love his intention. So hopefully there's something of that alive in this room, and the great abstract painters or the great Venetians that I admire very much. I just want to keep this ambition alive. It's hard enough because I've got a young family now and working on a part-time basis just to try and keep this ambition alive. But it works for me in this room, and I just feel every time I make a work that I do feel is successful. That's enough for me, really. And yeah, digital, I do like digital work. I can't think right now what I would like, but there are, I try and have a wide appreciation.
Well, I think one of the ways that I think it's materially affecting your life in some ways. It's changing the way that artists and studios relate to each other, and that's been kind of an undercurrent of a lot of these interviews. Talking about how the presumption of an artist in a studio now is not necessarily what it was before, and that has a huge amount to do with the rise of a digital aesthetic and the rise of like digital modes of production.
Yeah.
And so I mean, like, you're entering that world, and it is affecting you if for no other reason on matters of space. And I'm just kind of, we talked a little bit about the space aspect of it earlier, and I'm just kind of wondering if like in terms of the actual source material that you're pulling from, and the the ways that it's affecting you in other ways other than strictly material ways, whether those are, I mean, you say like, you want to limit things in some ways, but I guess what I'm kind of interested in is not so much how you want to like personally limit things, but how these things might limit a painter.
Yeah, well, if you're in a climate where it's just people just want to see a film or a digital work or photograph, a lot of that is about transportation, because it costs a lot less to move that kind of work around. I mean, as you told me once, Bill, Chelsea is just having hot desk studios, and I kind of wonder what kind of education that is opening up for a lot of people. But then times change, we don't live in a kind of, I mean, this isn't, it's not necessarily a Victorian art, it's just painting it's not dying either, because it somehow, it's tricky to get at, really. I mean, I just know that this gives me meaning. Working with a physical medium gives me medium over and above working with a digital film. Even though, I do love film, I don't know why I don't work with smoke, or don't work with stop motion animation based on some of my earlier influences. But there's something about the physical tangibility of paint, being able to deal with contemporary issues. And by contemporary issues, I mean, one of my concerns is landscape. If anything filters through the work, it is a contemporary or a modern day reinterpretation of landscape. And one thing that is very common today, something we always get about, is the amount of plastics in the oceans and pollution on the planet and forests being devastated. So to that mind, I do have some images here that are ready to pull about pollution in the sea or waste on a beach, or just a sad state of what, to the best of intentions, humans endeavour to feed 8 billion people are doing to a planet. And so somewhere behind all this, that there's a utopian idea. We worked through the 1950s how to deal with nuclear repercussions. We probably haven't really, but a lot of important breakthroughs happened at that same kind of nexus. Now we kind of still live with that at the back of our mind, and it seems got even sillier because we've got people like Trump and Putin in power. But there's also the other side of that, pollution, and still wanting to make something beautiful that can have cultural relevance somehow through a painting practice, which is kind of what I want to do. I just love painting. Well, studio, you just have, it gives you the time, away from everyday concerns. It's a kind of a quiet space. Someone might have a reading chair that they like, or they go fishing. It's a pastime. Obviously, if you're writing, you need a quiet room. This is my kind of thinking space in a way, and as messy as it is. And it allows me to, I mean, with this body work I'm making now, I mean, I'm working frontally for the first time in 20 years because I'm making thousands or hundreds of paint marks that somehow, in my interpretation of paint making or abstraction, I'm taking a lot of the, I don't want to use the word angst, but there's something aligned with the paint mark, to do with time, to do with an action taking place in a space or on a wall. But then I'm making that, I'm recording that, I'm imbuing it with enough body so I can work with it later, and then that's moved away. So I might not use that paint mark for a year down the line. So somehow I've de-stressed the paint mark, as it were, taken away a lot of this, to be a painter today, you need someone like an Albert Olen who's kind of a bit more jokey. I like Albert Olen, but somehow he's in that Kimberger field of painting where it's kind of a bit jokey. and I don't know if personally I want to be jokey, because every paint mark somehow has a meaning, and I spend quite a long time with each mark, so I've got to then do a couple of gel levels to give it the body I need. But I'm just building up an index of marks to work with, and I just have them hanging around, becoming part of the space around me, which I then will work into in a painting depending on what starts to happen on the studio wall. Intuitively, I will say as well, I work, composition is kind of intuitive, built up over time, and yeah.
And then I guess that brings up the question of storage and how that relates to, requiring a studio or needing a space to like keep things going while you wait on a show or something like that. I mean, and particularly for somebody who's moved around in a lot of like different cities and stuff, like, I guess how much of the archive are you able to hold on to, either mentally or psychologically, or is that even a good thing to hold on to? I mean, we all know what the answer to that is, but like, the readers don't know.
Hello, readers. Storage is an issue, but over the years I've adapted various ways. I've got 3 crates that normally make a bed, and they're full of paintings. They're not actually in this flat at the moment because they're at this storage place that I can use, but in a normal situation, 3 crates make a bed, and they're full of 20 years work. I've got another longer crate that would be a bench. Normally these things just roll up and fit in boxes. In there's a whole load in there. Cram under there, everywhere. I guess that's a life. You just fit it in everywhere. And as Bill's made note, I do have a lot of stuff, but I'm not someone who can just make something and throw it away. I think part of my practice, because I make a painting without canvas, I feel it's a little bit lighter, easier to look after. I'm not left with the I still have the physical remnants. It's just the skin, and I can roll up hundreds under a bed. It's quite practical that way, actually. And I do have a few sales now and then. And I'm not really going to encourage. I mean, I'd love to have a few sales, but
yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
I'm not going to encourage.
Yeah, I just, it's yeah. It's
why people ask for the tape back.
It's just tricky, but it's about making work. But sometimes you see shows and you think that artist didn't need to make half of that. It's just to sell somehow. If that comes out right or wrong, I don't know. But everything I just try and keep hold as much as possible, and see what happens.